There we go. It should be, it's streaming live. Wonderful. So here we are. Welcome, everybody. I am with the wonderful Amelia Vogler, who is an international grounding and energy medicine specialist who has taught other practitioners, who has healed all sorts of people, and who is very sensitive to the whole idea of thoughts and intentions and how that works in healing. So welcome, Amelia. Lovely to see you again.
Hi, Lynn. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So I've been really fascinated, and I've been telling my listeners about this recently because I've been really fascinated by how many practitioners inadvertently shoot themselves in the foot when they are doing healing. They may be brilliant at what they do, and most of them are, but they don't realize how much their languaging or even their thinking is undermining them. And so that's really what we want to talk about today, and talk about how to turn that around, because it's been, it's been a personal quest of mine, really, not only because of my interest in intention, but because of my own personal journey. I was born with misaligned hips that were essentially hip dysplasia, and it runs in my family, but I was able to override it with everything from yoga to staying active to a bit of osteopathy and a lot of intention until a few years ago. And then they just got completely out of whack and actually stopped moving. So my go-to always with healing is to start with the least invasive and then work my way through if things don't work. And so I tried lots of different things, everything from, from osteopathy and all the usual ones to stem cell stuff and all kinds of things in between, and lots of intention, etc. And while I would improve for a while, it was, it became clear to me that I finally needed surgery, which I got, and I'm back to all kinds of bendy and twisty yoga moves and everything else. But here's the interesting piece of this, and this is where I want to bring you in. What horrified me actually through this journey was the languaging, the inadvertent languaging. I mean, it got to be material for me because I was listening to even practitioners of intention. A person who is essentially an intention maestro said to me, it's going to be a long and painful journey. Stuff like that. Or things like, well, we might get you a bit better, but that's about the best I could do. And I was listening to them, and I mean, I even stopped a few people and said, what am I supposed to do with that? How is that supposed to contribute to my healing? And this really got me thinking about what healers think and what healers say, and how that's probably pivotal. So what about you, Amelia? So you do the kind of energy medicine. Does it require thought, or are you just transmitting?
Well, it's interesting, Lynn, that the type of healing that I do is considered in the science distance healing and tension modalities. So I work only on distance now, only remote healing. And when we think about thoughts, what I'm curious about is, what is a thought? Is a thought a visualization? Is a thought a word? And where's the root of those thoughts? And I have had similar experiences as you have, being, I had Lyme's, got a Lyme's infection and went to my doctor and was working with their nurse practitioner, who said, gosh, with all of this wrong, you should really feel worse. And I said,
oh my God.
I thought to myself, yeah, maybe, but I don't feel worse. And so she and I had to have a conversation about that. But, you know, language is so important and we use it every day so casually, and we forget that everything is energy, that our thoughts are energy, that our words are energy, that our feelings are energy. And I think it's important maybe to share for those on the call, just kind of back us up and remember, as energy practitioners, we're working with energy. We're working with that fundamental language that exists in and through everything. And so when we can use language to tap into the larger language, we're really working energy to energy, source to source. And the way that I do it in my practice is through the vehicle of imagination. And I think it's very interesting because our imagination is what brings us into that greater field. It's what bypasses our everyday reality, our everyday thoughts, and allows us to really take a skill each of us already know, because we've all been children, we all daydream, we all dream our way through and out of our situations, and use that as the vehicle for our healing.
I love that idea. And that is really about, you know, visualizing or imagining the outcome. And I know from my personal experience and also with the thousands of practitioners I've worked with and individuals I've worked with intention, that's a key piece, because it's all about, with healing, visualizing that moment when you get the all clear. That's pretty much what I talk to my students about all the time. And it's certainly what happened to me. What I tended to do was imagine myself dancing. And I actually, over here in the UK, we have a thing called Strictly Come Dancing, and Dancing for the Stars grew out of that. So it is essentially a dancing competition with, you know, with celebrities, and it's great fun, but their production values are amazing, and the dancing is extraordinary. And while I was watching it, and at my worst, when I was, you know, I just wasn't really walking well at all. I was walking with assistants and sticks and things. Last year, I used to imagine myself up there dancing. And I kept saying to myself in my mind, I can do that. Now, I couldn't even walk without aid at that point, but I had in my mind always, I can do that. And now I can do that, you know. But that was a really key piece for me, and is never losing that presumption of competence. And I just want to speak to that presumption of competence, presumption of healing, really, in our case. I've been reading about, with my other work, What Doctors Don't Tell You, about spelling to communicate, which is a system given to children with autism and adults with autism who are silent. And so it's always been assumed that they are cognitively damaged. And what they're finding with this whole system is they give these people a spelling board. And the problem they have is not cognitive deficiency, it is fine motor skill deficiency. So they have challenges with fine motor skills, but they have gross motor skills. So with a language board, they can just poke letters of the alphabet. And they do that, and outcomes with people who have been thought to have the mentality of a 5-year-old, outcomes extraordinary, full sentences, perfect spelling, complex words and construction, etc. And what happens with this system is a presumption of competence. We know you can do this. Mm-hmm. And I think that to translate that over to healing for practitioners has to be key. Presumption of hope, presumption of this person will get better. So tell me a bit about, what do you think when you get a client and that client comes in with, think of something, cancer or something like that, a serious challenge. What goes through your head?
Well, it's so interesting, Lynn, because I've taken some of your trainings, and I have to say you've influenced my work in such amazing ways. So I'm very grateful for you. and your teaching, but some of the ways that I am mindful about interacting with the clients doesn't start when I see them the first time. It starts while I'm reading their paperwork ahead of time. And I've come to find that my process includes a lot of what I might call reflective listening, reflecting potential, reflecting possibility. So if I read in their paperwork, I had a knee injury and it was shattered, what I see immediately is the fully healed knee. And I really read through my paperwork, tracking not what's wrong with them or what they're suffering from, but holding the vision of fully healed in and through all of the aspects. And I'm really keen on working with limiting beliefs and limiting patterns, which I find really interesting and exciting, because the limiting beliefs and patterns that I tend to work with are those that have haunted people from ever since they were very, very little. You know, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm unlovable. I don't want to be here. Things that come before one might think of them as a conscious being, you know, even into little childhood. And so when I start seeing these patterns, immediately I'm brought into the visualization of a grandmother loving them, or a friend in being inspired by their enoughness. And so that's the first part, is just introducing their patterns in an already fully healed way. And then even in our first conversations, someone might present, say, that knee issue or feeling an unworthiness. And I would say, what would it look like if that knee was perfectly healed? Tell me about that. I want to know about that. I want to know what inspires you. And it's these hooks of inspiration that I hold so dear in my practice, because they become the little portals through which we can invite more imagination and more curiosity. And you can kind of feel the energy of even my talking about it is we get set in a space of limitless potential. And so that's the intake. We haven't even done anything, and this person is already fully healed in my eyes, and I'm the witness. So the witness is seeing them in this fully healed form. And we know when we study energy that everything is interconnected. So when I'm seeing that, when I'm holding that space of entrainment is communicating that already on these subtle levels. And honestly, I think we could stop right there and have amazing outcomes.
I know. I love that. That is so great. This idea from the very beginning, I love that you do that. From the very beginning, the presumption of healing then is, you see it, you're imagining it. And I was speaking the other day with Annette Beniel, and what she said, which was so interesting, is if she thinks about a diagnosis, you know, a negative diagnosis with, and basically a diagnosis oftentimes comes with a prognosis. So you have cancer and it's, you know, pancreatic cancer. Well, most people die from that. So the assumption is that's what you're told. That's not necessarily what I believe. So there's this presumption of the prognosis. And what you're doing is preempting that. And what she said, so interesting. You said just now, the energy increases. And that's what I find so interesting, is that energy between the healer and the healee changes. And
Absolutely.
whether or not you are sitting with them in the room or you are doing this via Zoom, the energy changes. Their energy of possibility opens up. And Annette, who is so body aware, because she's this wonderful bodywork practitioner, talked about when she thought about a diagnosis, she would get all constricted. She would actually feel the limitation of the words, the thoughts, the everything. So what you're doing, what I think is so fascinating, is this opening up of this total possibility from the outset. I think that is fabulous. Now, what about the word diagnosis? What about using a diagnosis? What do you tend to do? You read somebody's thing and they usually have on their paper a diagnosis there, right?
Right. Well, and I'm very, very mindful that there's two ways that I approach it. And it really depends on how someone brings that diagnosis into our conversation, because I'm not going to bring it in if they don't bring it in, because there's no reason to do that. But if it does come in, I might ask them, and how do you know that? And how do they know that? And I try to get that right out, because labels, some of the most effective medical practitioners that I've seen in my life and those who I seek out, the very first question in interviewing them is, how do you feel about the labels of diagnosis? And I won't see a doctor that puts a label on things. They work holistically, and that's for my own personal care, because I believe in intention. And I believe that when we singularly focus thoughts in a specific direction, the energy is going to flow that way. And we can feel it, just like the woman whom you were working with or talking with yesterday, feeling that constriction. The universe, the field, the source, the energy is ever flowing. And whenever we feel it coming in like this, we know we're acting against the nature of who we are, of the universe. So I don't ever talk about diagnosis. I talk about hope. I talk about possibility.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting. I just came across, I was wondering and just researching today about I was thinking about hope, and I was thinking about audacity. And so, of course, I thought of Barack Obama's book, The Audacity of Hope. And so I wanted to look at where he got that. And that came from his pastor, who was looking at a painting of hope. And it is a picture, I think it was done in the 1800s, and the name of the artist escapes me, but it's a picture of like a spirit, a woman. She's in rags. She's sitting on top of a globe that is like the earth, and she's got a little lyre, a little like a harp, and there's only one string. And I love this image. It's so great. And the pastor was basically saying, yet she still has, she's in rags, she's bleeding, everything, but she still has this audacity to hope. Now, Barack took it and said audacity of hope. But I love that whole idea of the audacity to hope. It is a necessary element of healing, is that thought, that certainty that you will be healed. And that is such an important element to it. It's so central to it. It's central for the practitioner to think it as well. Yeah. So we're talking really about suspending this whole idea of prognosis and just saying, yeah, there might be just one little string left in that lyre, but I'm going to play the music of the spheres on it. And that's what I think is so fabulous about the suspension of diagnosis. If you do get a diagnosis, it's really important, I think, to ignore it, because it also sends you in different directions. Now, I don't mean ignore getting help. I mean, ignore the thought process that goes with that diagnosis. Now, sometimes it's helpful to have somebody look at what might be going on with you. I mean, I certainly needed x-rays, because I had umpteen practitioners who got it all wrong, thought it was my back, not my hips. So it was really important I get some decent x-rays. But it's the prognosis of it. And what I like to say is, after all of these practitioners who were giving me all this downbeat information or diagnosing me. Somebody said, you have scoliosis. I do not. Somebody else was saying, oh, this hurts, doesn't it? It did not. And those were implanting people when they say this should hurt. they are going to implant that idea. But for me, what really won me over with the surgeon I had, which was amazing, was I was, doing my usual and asking her all the different things. What's the downside? What are the, what's going to happen here? And what are all the stats? And how good do you do? What's your track record, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And my final question was, so what can't I do after the surgery? And she just looked at me and said, well, maybe skydiving. And I thought she had me. That was it. That was done. And that's pretty much it. I might do zip lining this summer, but she had me there, because what that was imagination, as you say. That conjured up for me a whole image so beyond where I was, that end point of complete activity and more activity than I'd been able to do for a while. And I think that's that real key element is whatever, if you only have that one string, you still have hope. And so that has to be a central position for the practitioner.
Absolutely.
So tell me, you were saying dealing with limiting thoughts. Tell me a little bit about what you do with that. You've got a patient who you can see is feeling and always has felt, I'm not good enough. And that is part of this whole constriction that's coming out in bodily form. What do you do?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I have a really lovely process that I work in, because what I like to use as my tool is symbolic memory, because we know that the language of energy is metaphor. We know that metaphor and imagery allows us these little doorways and these little portals to get in. And so if it was a limiting belief of unworthiness, I would be curious what that looked like for them, so that they could kind of bring that expression into their energy field. And one tool that I use is, I love it, it's such a simple tool. Well, what if I gave you a magic wand? What if I give you a magic wand? What do you need right now to feel cared for, to feel bestowed upon? And they, many times people will take that magic wand and they will be Cinderella's godmother, and suddenly the pumpkin becomes the chariot that takes them to whatever it is they're desiring. And that magic wand capability, possibility, it's amazing, the potential for it. So the first step is to allow the client to be self-empowered to find what it is that they're looking for and fill that gap in with the universal wisdom. The second step is to go and repattern the energy around it. And that's sort of a skill that I've cultivated over the last 15 years in doing this work. I have a really wonderful balancing integration process that it holds every time. And I think it holds because of the belief instilled in the process that the client walks themselves through. I think healing practitioners often get caught right in that funny place of doing too. And really, healing is self-healing. So this is about creating that empowering conversation, holding someone up in the courage to take that next step, to open their mind. And then once they self-assign that possibility is true for them, then we can come in and say, all right, let me support you because I see you, I'm the witness. And that's the confirmation piece that I think is so beautiful in a healing relationship.
Yes, and I think that is it. You just said a whole bunch of stuff that's so important. This whole idea of healing is self-healing. That is so key. And that's why, as you say, practitioners inadvertently get caught up in the technique.
Yeah.
They think that's really doing the work. And because of that, and they're focused on the technique, they're not focused on their words. They're not focused on the ambience. I was fascinated to see that for hip patients, the favorite music on in the operating room, doctors like to listen to music. The favorite one is hip hop music now, which is blaring because it keeps them, the beat keeps them going. And I'm just thinking about that. Well, a lot of hip hop music is really negative words and stuff. And I'm just thinking swear words and all kinds of things. And I'm thinking about what's that patient absorbing? But so much work. I mean, the work of, the Harvard scientist and practitioner, Ted Kapchuk, is an expert on the placebo effect. And he has found so many extraordinary things. One of them is if a doctor has a set of pills with the word placebo written all over it. So this is only a sugar pill. Yet he has a good relationship with his patient. He says, take this, it'll make you feel better. In an extraordinary number of cases, it does. It's that relationship, it's that permission, giving the patient, you have my permission to heal. And so as you're saying, it's really the healing is being done by this extraordinary thing we call our bodies. But the doctor, the practitioner, the healer is just enabling that. He or she is an enabler. So you start thinking about that and you think about the power of the thoughts to change that energy. Now, what about the whole idea of resonance, of you essentially being a tuning fork to reestablish their energy pattern, but we're talking about thoughts and emotions. So have you observed anything like that, Amelia?
Oh, that is such a provocative question, Lynn. I love it. So I'm beginning to just think about, first of all, what I might call practitioner preparation, and how it is that we tune our tuning fork prior to being in a setting with another individual. Because I think one of the fundamental gaps in healing work is the gap, or healing education is the gap around grounding. And healing touch, the modality that came in from Janet Menken, she has a grounding and centering process at the beginning of every single session. And that allows us as a practitioner to come into contact with that great field of energy, take everything that we're thinking. And I joke around with my clients all the time and say, let me take a moment and get grounded and centered, because I don't want my grocery list to show up here in our session. I want to get that out of the way so that I can be fully present with you, which is also energetically supporting my vibration and my frequency being open and flowing, such that I can resonate in that entrained field, that merged field setting, even over the phone, even across the planet, in a way that helps non-verbally support the courage to step into their own healing, because we're holding the potential in a nonverbal or energetic way. So I think it's very, very provocative question and very, very important to the field. I am a grounding specialist, which is like, what is that? It's really about how do we connect in to ourself, to the greater field, to our life, to our story, to the possibility, so that we can be that resonating tuning fork and help support anybody that we come in contact with. Because a smile to a stranger at the perfect time can be just what's needed to change something very powerful. We are powerful beings on this planet.
Oh, yeah. And probably no one is more powerful in certain instances than a practitioner, a healer,
Yeah.
because someone is there at their most vulnerable, wanting to be healed, desperate to be healed. And everything you're saying is affecting them so profoundly that, and everything you're thinking is affecting them so profoundly. Now, you know this, Amelia, and I will just say it for our audience, but you're a leaky bucket. Your thoughts are leaking out of you at every moment. We have this idea, the old science tells us, that thoughts are locked inside our skulls, but the new science demonstrates that is not the case, that our thoughts are one more energy, and they not only are things, but things that affect other things. So even when you're saying one thing and thinking another, this person's a goner, this person, I can't really do much to help this person, or are you kidding? What are they doing? And oftentimes practitioners inadvertently are thinking aloud. I had this one right before my surgery where I just went in just to get relaxed, et cetera, and used some microcurrent technology and a modality. And when she heard I was going to have hip surgery, she said, a double hip surgery too. She said, God, that's pretty drastic. And again, I stopped her and I said, what do you think I'm going to do with that? How am I going to deal with that? Or I know somebody else said, when I was working with a very good specialist, a physiotherapist, but she had a student in, and usually with this therapy, you have to do a certain position, exercise or something, and then walk to see if that improves things. And so the student kind of blurted out something like, oh God, let's see if she's still lame when she does this. And again, I stopped her. I had to say, did you hear what you just said? How am I going to respond well to that? So unfortunately, in most instances, patients don't have the wherewithal, the courage, even the presence to stop someone who is inadvertently harming them at that point. So what you said is so important about them grounding first, the preparation, the understanding that they have to suspend all of that and be a cheerleader for possibility, a cheerleader of certainty.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's really important to just put a little marquee around, or a little asterisk around, suspending belief, because I've come in contact recently with certain healing practitioners who are very dogmatic about, you suspend your belief and listen to me. And it's a very funny and sort of worrisome twist. And I think people should be very aware of how your practitioners should be inspiring you and supporting you in making decisions for yourself. And, a lot of the healing process is learning, what do I keep? What do I let go of? What do I allow in? What do I say no to? How do I feel strong in my conviction to stand in the presence of my own health, healing, and life journey? And I just think it's everything here on this planet has those double sides. We live in such a dual world where this is also the healing and the curse. And so
yeah, exactly.
I'd like to put that out there.
Yeah. Oh no, so important, that whole idea. What am I learning from this? What is you turn around. I always love to say, it's great to have your rear view mirror, because you look back and you see the perfection that was your life, and all of those things that happened that you thought were the big bumps in the road turned out to be the blessings, and the healing journey, as you say, is got a duality too. But that was so interesting what you just said about about suspending belief, because there is such a dogmatism dogmatism inadvertent.
Yeah.
When people get trained in a certain thing, you know, the old saying, when all you've got is a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. And that is so much the case with practice. And also with people putting their own experience, practitioners inadvertently putting their own experience onto a situation. I had one guy who saw me who he had a certain condition. So he was trying to overlay his condition onto me. And I kept saying, no, no, that doesn't hurt. No, that isn't the case. And he wasn't hearing it because he had made that diagnosis based on what had happened to him. And so that is really interesting. We're almost getting to clean slate of intention.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. That's part of that grounding piece as a practitioner, as well as putting your grocery list, putting your life experience, walking into this conversation being truly someone who's holding the potential for everything. All possibilities exist in this moment between you and I. And what I find so fascinating too, listening to your stories about your hips, is I work in surgical settings and I love working surgeries. I think they're fascinating because I have this bizarre talent in moving tissues. And, I remember supporting this gentleman in a very invasive back surgery. And for me to be included in a surgical team requires conversations with the anesthesiologist, requires conversations with the surgeons, because we're all a team. And I remember the surgeon coming to me after that surgery and saying, do you know, I think you moved the tissues, because every time I went to make an adjustment, the tissues would move right away. And I said, yes, it's possible. And he said, I'll keep you on my team anytime. That was easy. And it's amazing what we can do when we focus our mind on the possibility and we direct that specific intention for healing related to the vision, the imagination, the visualization of highest outcome. Those have to be linked, because it's not my idea of what's true for this person. It's their idea of what's true. You need the tissues moved, let's move them.
Absolutely. And so that's brilliant. And that you just said so many things in that vignette. It's so brilliant. One is the idea that, we have a certain idea about reality and what is possible. Somebody wrote me in on a current masterclass to say, my problem is I just don't believe this works. I don't believe this whole intention thing works. And so the problem with that is that already she's got a limited view of what life is and how things work. And so an instant being healed in an instant, or tissue moving, is not part of that thought form, is not part of her universe. So I think the most important thing for her, and this is why I think Power of 8 groups are so important for either patients or people in general, is that if you don't believe, you're going to see somebody else in that group have a spontaneous healing in some area of their life. And that opens it up to you. You suddenly are far less of a doubting Thomas. But it was that whole idea of, okay, the universe is different, but also this idea of, I think this is so important too, of not being so dogmatic about the healing modalities. Miracles occur with all kinds of medicine because, as you say, it's the healer who does it. In my early days working on What Doctors Don't Tell You, people would call up and say, does chemotherapy work? And I would trot out the statistics. Well, it works about 15% of the time. That's about it, 9%, whatever it was. And now I don't say that. Now I say, well, do you believe it's going to work? because that's the only thing that matters, is what do they believe is going to work. It could be a bottle of pills with placebo written across it, but it's their belief that is really going to be sort of central here. But I also want to say, before we take some questions, we talked a little bit about the energetic dynamic between you two. And I wanted to address that a little bit further. So you talked about being this sort of cheerleader for possibilities, but also I want to get back to the tuning fork idea, that you, with a certain a certain opening of possibilities, can essentially order that other person, get them to, and by order I mean in a kind of sense of quantum ordering, that the more coherent organism will order the other,
Exactly,
the less coherent organism. Do you find things like that?
absolutely, all the time. And I tell you what, I don't want to call it the hook. It's not a kind word, but the doorway through which we have to both walk to enter into that therapeutic conversation. In nursing, in holistic nursing, there's a phrase called healing, therapeutic presence. And therapeutic presence is defined by a practitioner, in that case, a nurse, holding someone in their wholeness. It's holding someone in their wholeness. And if you think about the potential of frequency, or the potential of our field, the expansion and frequency of our field, think about if we're holding someone in their wholeness versus we're holding somebody in parts, which one is going to have the highest potential for entrainment, which is going to invite us into the potential for healing. And I think that's what you're talking about. And so as a practitioner, how do we set that up? Yes, we're doing our grounding and our centering, and we come to love the person we're with. We love them. We love them with every fiber of our being. We believe in them. We believe in their possibility. We believe in their story. And there is not anyone, and I tell people this, there is no one for this hour that is more important to me than you. There is no one. And I think it's like a mother's love, that ability to just stay singularly focused on the wholeness of this individual, so that that communication of wholeness can come through, whether it's coming through me and being offered in service of, or coming through them as they find it themselves. Doesn't matter. I don't care about the process. I care that they find what they're looking for in themselves. So I think that's, for me, the process of this really cool resonance that you're talking about.
I think that is so brilliant. And that is what Power of 8 groups always talk about, is never, they felt more love in that group than they ever have. And that's because it's just unconditional love from a stranger. Now, a practitioner may not be a stranger, but they're not a member of the family.
Right.
It's an outsider who is suddenly giving them something either they may not have ever experienced before, or if they did, it was only a close family member, a partner, or something like that. And they're suddenly getting bombarded with this fantastic love. And as you say, I think that really has to be key, is you just have to open your heart. And that's so interesting too, Amelia, when you think about how conventional practitioners, conventional medicine practitioners, doctors, nurses, are taught not to touch their patients, yes, not to relate to their patients. This is just another slab of meat. And that has to be so damaging, because as you say, that partnership, I was ill with what was a faulty microbiome back when I was in my 30s. And what got me into what doctors don't tell you was the healing journey with that, which was I found an extraordinary nutritional pioneer, a doctor who was really leading the charge with integrative medicine way back then in the 80s, when I was in my 30s. So I was so fascinated by our interaction. We were partners in my healing journey. He definitely made it clear this was my healing journey. But I was so fascinated by the way this was all tipped on its head and how everything else stopped when I came into his office. He was so focused on me. I thought he's going to, I almost felt like he was going to bore a hole through me. He was so into my healing journey and my healing, getting better, and was absolutely a cheerleader through that whole thing. So that love piece is so essential. So we've got a load of people on, and I think they have some interesting questions. Why don't we take some of those?
Yes,
Let's
please.
see what's going on. So, okay, this is a great one for you, Amelia.
Sure.
This is from Marino. I have trouble with visualization capability, i.e. an inability to visualize things called aphantasia, which makes me struggle with imagining myself fully healthy. How do I overcome this? Can I use different modalities of imagination, such as feelings and sensations? Any thoughts about that?
Oh, I could talk about this for 3 days. I love this question. And I'm really serious. I could talk about it for 3 days. But here's the skinny of it. Let me distill it down in my mind a moment. But in essence, we have 7 different ways of doing vision in the body. We have physical sensations. That's a way we resonate with the world when we get the shivers or the chills, or we get a stomach ache. If we're around somebody who's super grumpy, that's a sign. That's a way of doing vision. Some of us, myself included, cry all the time. It's like when you're so moved, you can probably feel it in me. I'm very passionate about this. And suddenly a truth comes, and I'm the lady that never wears mascara for a reason, because it'll come, I cry all the time. We have an emotional tuning fork as well. We also have the ability to see patterns in the world. That's another way of doing vision. I happen to be really good at sniffing out energetic patterns. That's a pattern here from early life, a pattern there from later life. Hey, there's possibility there. Let's open that way of doing vision. What about our relational vision, the way that we are in relationship with other people, kind of a matchmaker sort of gift and skill? That's a way of doing vision. Our language is one of my favorite visions. The way that we speak is a way of doing vision in the world. And some of us hear messages. Some of us hear words, inspirations. Hey, go and try skydiving, Lynn. Do that. Maybe that was something that her practitioner had heard in her mind, or saw that vision before she mentioned that as a therapeutic option. That's another way of visioning positive outcome for someone. And then there's just our knowing. Maybe it's not a visualization type vision, but maybe it's a knowing deep inside, I am well. And when we get that reflected, and Lynn's power of the 8 groups, I love them for the reflection piece, for the witness piece, because you have people affirming those different ways of doing vision, and it's just extraordinary. So I hope that little condensed answer helps.
Absolutely, Amelia. And I thought that was so well spoken. And, remember too, Marino, that, we're not all of us are visual, but we do have other senses. And Amelia touched on the kinesthetic sense. We might feel things, or we're auditory. We might hear things, that's how things come in. Or we're very, we're kinesthetic. We have, people who are oftentimes one of my daughters is very kinesthetic. She's And not surprisingly, she's a graphic designer. She's interested in shapes and touch and feel and all of that. And that's her emotional intelligence. So you can, and some people are just verbal. They see words in their heads. And all of those are an aspect of visualization. And even if you cannot see yourself as well, you can hear yourself as well. You can feel yourself as well. You can tell yourself you're well. And telling yourself you're well, making that new story about wellness is also really, really important. And certainly in my instance, what worked for me particularly was telling myself, I mean, one of the worst things I had to do in my mind was finally submit to conventional medicine. I've spent my whole life talking about the limits of this thing, and I finally had to do this. So I decided, I was all upset about it, and then I said, erase. I can't have that. I have to have a different kind of experience. I have to have a different kind of thought. And so going into the hospital, I decided I'm going to love this whole process. And I practically hugged my anesthetist. I was smiling through the whole week at the surgeons and the nurses and the physios and the everything. I was in there for 8 days. And consequently, I did love it. I had a really great time. And I got healed, but also I didn't have any pain. And that is what mystified everybody there. I didn't have to take all of that coterie of terrible drugs that people have to take, opiates, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't even have to take non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. So that, I think it was so interesting that it wasn't an image that I was keeping in my head other than the dancing at other times. But through that week, I was just holding on to the positive thought that this was going to be great. And it became great. So perhaps that's a way of answering your question, Marino. Now, what about Betty Ann, Amelia, do you work with mental health issues versus physical issues? How do the treatments differ if they do?
You know what, Betty Ann, every treatment differs because every single person is individual, and sometimes a mental health or limiting belief type presentation is going to show up in the body physically. Sometimes the physical is going to have roots somewhere else, and we walk the journey in illuminating those patterns together. So I would say the process is the same, the way that I work, but each person's journey is very, very different. I mean, I can't think of one metaphor that I've used in healing that has been repeated person to person, because I see the vision and I share the vision, and then people say, I can see myself there. Okay, what does it feel like? What is it? What's your experience now? What do you need right now? And we go together, and the individual is slowly really healing themselves through walking through possibility after possibility after possibility. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, great answer, Amelia. And, we want to just remind everybody that there isn't this big separation between mental illness and physical illness. There is something awry, something that is a challenge with this particular person that can have expression physically, expression mentally, but that is also tied in together. Usually mental illness is, there's something upstream that's involved in that. It's a whole complex, extraordinary interwoven organism. We have miracle of a living thing that is the human body. And so that can all come from all kinds of things. And mostly it has to do with, we're finding more and more, the person's perception of their place in the world, their emotional place in the world. They're finding, for instance, with, I was fascinated by the book, The Radical Remission, where the author talks about the 9 ways that patients with terminal cancer turn it completely around. And she finds only 2 of them two of the 9 have to do with physical things that you do. Changing your diet, taking the right supplements or herbs or whatever. The other 7 have to do with community, with maybe changing a limiting situation, with emotional ties, with spirituality. All of those things are a different kind of plane, but it's all about feeling our place in the world and not feeling that we are trapped in some way and life is never going to become good. And this is why it comes back to this whole thing of the practitioner learning how to keep that space open, keep that place open, because in the main, whatever healing mechanism he or she has is not going to be anywhere near as powerful as helping that person expand into their feeling of joy, of realizing that life can be good again, which is oftentimes the problem with cancer. So I want to just confirm that we're really talking about the same thing.
Yeah. I love that,
Okay.
Lynn. Thank you.
Let's see what else we got. We could talk for hours.
Yes.
We could talk for hours, and we have. Okay, and somebody asked about that doctor who sorted out my microbiome. That was Dr. Stephen Davis, who has written Nutritional Medicine, which was a groundbreaking book back then. He is in Australia, sadly. But what was an extraordinary pioneer, is now commonplace with integrative specialists. But what made Stephen Davis so spectacular was the way he interacted, was his language, more than anything else. I was just blown away. I just felt like we're on this healing journey. We're on a little detective work here, and his detective work was pulling out whatever splinters, helping me pull out whatever splinters were in my fingers, essentially. Okay, so let's see. Oh, Rich said, it's so important to build on people's strengths versus focusing on their weaknesses. Absolutely. Do you want to speak a little bit more to that?
Sure. The first thing that comes to my mind, Rich, around that is if we look at classical neuroscience and we look at the phrase, neurons that fire together wire together, and we look at the negativity bias, which basically says we're hardwired to identify threats in our life, to track negativity, because it kept us safe a long time ago. And we have to routinely check that in our own mind. I love Dr. Rick Hanson's work, who talks about the building goodness in our life one little step at a time to attend to that negativity bias. And that's part of the work that I do in empowerment, kind of what do we do after healing to help keep the momentum moving. But I think that's what you're getting at, Rich, is that we're offering someone to step into their strengths, step into their goodness. So it gets that little voice, whatever those little thoughts are that are sitting way back here in the back of the brain, that reptilian brain that's trying to keep us safe. When we overwrite that, the neurons are firing around goodness, around strengths, around wisdoms, around potential, around possibility. And thus we see more of that as we keep practicing it. So I think that's really linked up together in that concept.
No, thank you, Amelia. That is so great. Effie Maria says, if the client is so ill that he's thinking of dying and he has no more strength, does it make sense to send him healing thoughts and seeing him in complete health without saying anything? And someone, and she said, even if the client does not want this because he doesn't believe. Well, this is the point. Go back to the whole idea of the tuning fork. You are, and I do want to say, look, we are all going to die someday. That is one of the great certainties we have about our lives. But this person may not be ready. He may have given up hope. That's not the same as not wanting to live, but he may have given up hope because of what he was told. And he may not believe there is any ability to be healed, but you can be that tuning fork for possibility. And that's what I train the practitioners who come to my course, Become a Better Healer with the Power of 8. I talk to them about the fact that their very energy of positivity, of possibility, can essentially reprogram the other person. And I use reprogram, but really it's much more subtle. It's about energy. It's about essentially an infectious kind of possibility that creates it for the other person. In my conversation with Annette, this was so interesting yesterday. She was saying that, she gets children who cannot move, who have cerebral palsy, who cannot move their limbs, and have been told, and their parents have been told over and over again, that they are a hopeless case. Now, what she tells the parents to do is to stop thinking that, and to start noting, no matter what tiny progress that child makes, there is always progress. And to note that and to hold that. And she finds that when they change their thinking, the child improves. Now, not even what they do that's differently, when they change their thinking, the child improves. So what is that? It's like a healing thought. It's a healing energy that in itself is doing the healing, is being infectious, is catching on and giving that other person possibility. So I always like to say there is no such thing as false hope. There is only hope. And it is the best medicine we have.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, to add to that, sometimes I have seen the most fully healed right at that place before transitioning. And some of the things that I work with the dying is I ask them questions about what they loved the most. And I try to support them in finding that stream of love that's so healing. All healing is self-healing. So finding memory, the embodied experience of being in an expanded state, of being deeply connected with the other. This is beyond the place in the process. People can always go back in life and identify at least one moment, whether it be sitting with a little puppy at the pet store, of feeling cared for. And so I think that's a nice space that you can offer anyone who's transitioning. And Lynn, I wanted to mention too about the parent and the parental thoughts. When a child is prepubescent, hasn't gone through puberty yet, they often are more responsive and receptive of being in the parent's energy field. And so we kind of learn that in our energetic science. So really, the thoughts of a parent translate instantaneously and even more effectively when we're working with the parents' thoughts than the children. It's very interesting.
It is so fascinating. And this whole interweaving of thoughts make us, and you're talking about vulnerability in children too, and openness. And in a way, a patient is a lot like that too. So that interconnection and how important it is, and how we all have to be so responsive to our own thoughts and intentions all of the time, but most particularly when we're healing. And I loved that you talked about dying, because yes, that moment can also be a healing, you
Yes.
know?
Yes.
That is what you're really talking about, is opening up that space for the next possibility.
Absolutely.
And so the healer always holds the healed and holds the love for the healing. So everybody, this time has just flown, and it's just been really fun and so great, Amelia,
Thank you.
working with you and talking with you and kicking around these wonderful ideas. So tell us where to find you.
Oh, Lynn, thank you. And thank you everyone for participating in the group container of this conversation, because I know that both, I can't speak for Lynn, but I know she and I are both so appreciative for the collective field that's inspiring the conversation. So thank you for participating. You can find me on my website, ameliavogler.com. You can find me on Instagram, Amelia Vogler _healing. And I think, Lynn, this be a good time to talk about this very exciting course I have coming up?
Sure, you mentioned
Thank
it.
you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so once a year, I pull the curtain back on my practice, because I believe that there's a lot of healing that's needed in the world. So I pull the curtain back. I teach everybody. I teach you my intake process. I teach you the arc of how I run my practice. I teach how to do group healing. I teach safety mechanisms. I teach how to work in remote sessions. So it's called the Complete Distance Healing Masterclass or training, and it's starting soon in July. So I welcome anyone who has a practice who's curious, how do I do this in a remote session? You can come learn from all of the mistakes that I made over these 15 years, and then we can get more healing to the planet.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amelia. And it sounds like a brilliant course. And for me, I am kicking off my course, Become a Better Healer with the Power of 8. So this course begins on May 13th, and it is for practitioners of all varieties. We have everything from doctors and nurses and podiatrists to distance healers to alternative practitioners of all varieties. And it's all about becoming conscious of the thoughts and language you're using toward your patients, how to really boost your success rate by changing those thoughts. And we dive deeply into a bit of science, a lot of practice, and we also show you how to use the power of 8 in your practice. Because one of the really powerful things that people don't recognize is the altruistic capability of a power of 8 group is actually an extraordinary healer. And they find over and over with science that when people are ill and they can help other people with the same or another illness, they're more likely to get better. And so the power of 8 group is a way to magnify their own healing process and accelerate it. So you can check that out on my website, lynnmctaggart.com, and look under courses, find Become a Better Healer with the Power of 8. We've got information on our Facebook. We've got information in the chat here. So Amelia, thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you, great minds, and all of that, thinking alike. And I hope this has been really interesting for everybody. Thanks again, Amelia, and hope to see you soon. Bye, everybody. Thanks for being part of this. Take care now.